So after discussing the state of nature and the state of war, John Locke deals with the theme of the foundation of private property. This theme concerns the passage from the original possession in common of all things to the right of an individual to the exclusive appropriation of some of those things. This transition takes place in the state of nature, that is, before the institution of civil society. As is well known, John Locke solves the traditional problem by rejecting two classical solutions. The first of these holds that the occupation assigns a legitimate title. The second derives the right of private property, that is, the second derives the right of private property from a contract. According to John Locke, private property, that is, the exclusive right which an individual claims to the enjoyment and disposal of a good, derives from the effort made by an isolated individual to appropriate it and, if necessary, to transform it and increase its value through his own labor. It goes without saying that this theory of the foundation of private property is one of the most original and innovative of John Locke's theses. Nothing comparable can be found in the other famous treatises of political philosophy that adopt the conceptual model of natural law theory. With his value theory of labor, his theory of original accumulation, and of the function of money, John Locke is the first political writer to deal with themes which would later become the specific object of a new science, political economy. Third, the fundamental institution of bourgeoisie economy, private property, comes into existence already complete and perfect in the state of nature, that is, before the rise of the state, unlike what we find in the theories of Hobbes and Rousseau. This is just such brilliant stuff. This is just such smart, brilliant stuff. So hello, everybody. What's going on? Maverick Charlie Merle. This is from Top Gun, for all you Top Gun enthusiasts. For all you old-ass motherfuckers that lived in the 80s and 90s. Let's read another passage here. So I'm just doing a reading from this book here, Thomas Hobbes and the Natural Law Tradition, Norberto Bobbio. On page 30, it says, during the years of Hobbes' adulthood, the dissolution of the state in England reached the extreme phase of civil war. The theme of civil war acquires a starker relief as we go from the elements written before the upheavals to Leviathan, written when the long and bloody struggle among the various factions had culminated in regicide. At first, civil war is a nightmare from which we must free ourselves. Then it is a calamity which we must try to avert for the future. The theme of the factions which tear the state apart appears in both the elements and Leviathan, together with the marvelous simile of Medea and her sisters who cut their father into pieces so that he could be born again. What? I don't remember that part, but Medea and her sisters cut their father into pieces so that he could be born again. In a way, Sakura, you had that Emiya had to stab Sakura with a rule breaker, which broke the spell that she was under. But it looked like he stabbed her, but he stabbed her with a rule breaker. And then it looked like he was ascended into heaven, like his spirit had died. But then they found a body to put his spirit in, and so now it's cool, bro. It's a different body, but it's the same spirit. It's the same spirit. But in Leviathan, this theme elicits the image of civil war twice, whereas in the elements, Hobbes speaks generically of rebellion. In Leviathan, there are frequent references to civil war as the worst of all evils, not only to civil war in general, but specifically to the one that has raged and still rages in England, while the author writes, howsoever it may be perceived what manner of life there would be where there were no common power to fear, by the manner of life which men that have formerly lived under a peaceful government used to degenerate into a civil war. In a civil war. And they're saying that's chapter 13, page 83. Of course, Hobbes is big on the natural laws. So what are the natural laws? You have a right to defend your. There's the right of mutual allowance, mutual justice, gratitude, accommodation. These are words that he uses for what he is saying. So self-defense, the first law of nature is this: to seek peace and to follow it as far as you can. To seek peace and to follow it as far as you can, but when you cannot, then you have the right to self-defense. To seek peace and follow it for as far as you can until war, violence, destruction, carnage, mayhem. But that's the last resort. So to seek peace and follow it is the first branch. When you cannot, then to defend yourself. So self-defense, the U.S. Constitution implies self-defense. I mean, why would you have the Second Amendment? Why would you have a gun to, protect yourself? So it implies self-defense, but it doesn't outright say you have a right to self-defense. There's also pardon and revenge not, no contempt, acknowledge equality, equality in commerce, the right to have a fair judge, the right to have a fair mediator, a mediator who looks for the truth. When two people are contradicting each other, then a witness or two or three will help to disclose what the truth is. No harm to others without cause. Let's see, judges for peace, honor and keep the promises, no pride, no arrogance. Anyways, so that's what we're talking about when we talk about Thomas Hobbes and the natural law tradition. Both Thomas Hobbes is both the father of the natural law philosophy and the positivist. The positivist laws, the positive laws are the laws that are written into the books. So thou should not murder because, common sense says if you hurt others, they could hurt you. So that's natural law. But then the law that says do not murder, well, that's the law that you got to obey because that's the positive law. That's the law that's written in black and white. And so some people say there is no natural law. It's all positive law. Some people say there's nothing but positive law. There's no natural law. Or one or the other. Only natural law, no positive law, or only positive law, no natural law. But I think there's a relationship between the two. The positive law comes from the rationality of the natural law. And it's incredible, too, because while I like his natural law theory, Thomas Hobbes, I think he's going to conclude that, well, hell, we're just a bunch of damn animals. We're all a bunch of evil, wicked piles of shit. If we could sit down and deduce our principles and actually have conversations with our neighbors and come up with a list of things that, they have a right to do, then you have a right to do, and then things that you don't want to be done to each other. If you could work out your problems amongst yourself, then you wouldn't need a fascist. You wouldn't need a third party. You wouldn't need some sort of intermediator to resolve your disputes. So unfortunately, I think he's going to take natural law and say, well, you need a king. Yeah, you have a right to self-defense, but you assholes don't know how that shit works. You need a king. You need a magistrate. You need a cop. You need a judge executive. You need a county commissioner, you need a mayor, and you need a city council. For you damn savages, you need a sovereign to keep you all in awe. And the human, when talking about presumption, that is, of the defect of those who believe themselves to be wiser than they are, Hobbes introduces judges who claim that they can give laws to the state rather than apply the laws issued by the sovereign. Hobbes thus comments, this is the beginning of civil war. So let's say that again. Judges who claim that they can give the laws to the state rather than apply the laws issued by the sovereign. So some judges think that they're the boss. They think that they're the legislature and the executive, but they're the judiciary. And if they're not applying the laws, and he's saying issued by the sovereign, so therefore the sovereign is issuing the laws, and then the judge isn't to determine which law he likes and doesn't law. His job is to enforce the laws that are on the book, specifically ones issued by the sovereign. And when judges don't apply the laws issued by the sovereign, That's the beginning of civil wars. I don't totally agree with a lot of Hobbes. I just really love his natural law. Of course you have a right to self-defense. Hey, America, how come you didn't put a right to self-defense in your Bill of Rights? You could almost take, I love the Bill of Rights, but if I had to choose between Hobbes's natural law and the Bill of Rights, I would pick Hobbes's natural laws. Hobbes thus poses a contractual hypothesis as the basis of the state. The contract which gives origin to the state stipulates what follows. A number of human beings decide to give up the unlimited right to all things which belongs to them in the state of nature. They also decide to transfer it to a third person, which may not be a natural person, but in assembly their twofold aim is to take out of their own hands the main weapon through which they can harm one another and to entrust it to someone who can use it in defense of all. As a matter of fact, if human beings must be able to will all of the above, then we must presuppose a third principle of human nature to be set alongside the two already cited. Hobbes does not even mention this third principle, for it does not even cross his mind that one could doubt it. That is, we must start from the assumption that human beings are reasonable. They can realize with a calculation which only reasoning beings are capable of making that war ensues from the unlimited right to all things, and that only by giving up such an unlimited right can war be avoided. The logic makes sense. If you have a right to all things, and that person has a right to all things, having a right to all things means you have a right to anybody and everybody, anything and everything, at any time and every time. So you get a right to all the good things and the bad things, and you get a right to be free to do what you want to do, including infringing on other people's freedoms. You have a right to injure other people. You have a right to take what's in other people's hands. You have a right to take their property and take, whatever you want to take. That's what the right to all things is. The right to all things is when you're born, you're a God, and so you can do anything. You can do anything. You could be the best good person out there. You could be the best bad person. Or you could just throw morals out the door and just be the most powerful and wealthy, or just be the most moral and principled, or just be the best damn mountain climber that you could be. You could be whatever you want to be. I want the world, Chico, and everything in it. Did Scarface not say? I want the world, Chico, and everything in it. It is not easy to imagine how this reasoning, perhaps utilitarian, but formally takes shape in the human beings driven by instincts such as those whom Hobbes describes. There is a hole in Hobbes's logic because he is presuming that humans are rational. And then, according to Robert Greene, people are not rational. They don't believe in what's rational. They go by their emotions. They go by what they think and what they see, and they go by what they're told and their friends and their families. And that sucks, because if man is not rational, we got the capacity to be irrational. We have the capacity for logic and rationality. It's the only thing that separates us from the animals. So if we don't use our rationality, then we're not being any better than the damn animals. And both democracy and capitalism, our democratic republic, we have elections. You got to be reasonable to be able to vote for the person that you think will be best for the country. You got to have rationality for democracy, and you got to have rationality for capitalism. So if you're not rational, then capitalism and democracy is going to crash. The implausibility of this assumption has been charged against him, especially by those who mistake his rational construction of the state for an inquiry into its historical origins, but there is no doubt that it is reasoning which leads Hobbes's human beings to found the state. While war is the product of a natural inclination, peace is a dictate of right reason. That is, of that faculty which allows human beings to derive certain consequences from certain premises, or to reconstruct first principles starting from factual data. Data. While war is the product of natural inclination. So if we're just a bunch of animals, and then we presume that we're allowed to do anything and everything to anybody we want to, including infringing upon other people's freedoms, including injuring other people, that's going to cause war. If everybody has a right to everything, that's going to cause war. And so the whole point of having civil liberties, while it's nice to have freedoms, by giving up the right to everything, you're actually taking away a lot of freedoms. A lot of freedoms are being taken away. So by adopting these civil liberties, okay, you don't have a right to injure me, you don't have a right to infringe upon my freedoms, but here are some freedoms that we all get to enjoy. The right to speak, the right to peacefully assemble, the right to kick out a soldier if they try to quarter our homes. Now, I haven't marked any of these off, so I guess, am I already at the free reading portion? Just going to do some free reading? Just going to wing it. Well, I like this. I just think it's so rich and intelligent. So, Thomas Hobbes belongs de facto to the history of the natural law tradition. There is no text on the history of legal and political thought which does not mention and analyze his philosophy as one of the typical expressions of natural law theory. On the other hand, Thomas Hobbes belongs de jure to the history of legal positivism. His conception of the law and the state is indeed a surprising anticipation of 19th century positivist theories. In these, we find expressed most radically the anti-natural law tendencies of Romantic historicism. When people speak of Alston, they usually recollect that he had an isolated precursor in Hobbes. Natural law theory and legal positivism are two antithetical currents which constantly polemicize with one another. One represents the negation of the other. How can Hobbes belong to both at the same time? Historians of natural law theory consider the author of Leviathan as one of the four great natural law theorists of the 17th century, together with Grotius, Spinoza, and Pufendorf. If the historians are right, how can the founders of legal positivism, whose success has lasted without interruption for nearly a century and who were fervent adversaries of natural law theory, consider Hobbes' theory as their historical model? And if the legal positivists are right, has the time not come for us to revise the historical histories of natural law theory and delete the name of Thomas Hobbes from them? It is well known that the history of modern natural law theory requires a profound revision. A good example is offered by the laborious exegesis, not Genesis, but exegesis, exegesis. Do I want to know how to say that word? Of course I do. So let's see what exegesis is and how to pronounce it. Exegesis. Critical explanation or interpretation of a text, especially of Scripture, the task of biblical exegesis. Exegesis. How do you pronounce exegesis? Well, how you pronounce exegesis is, well, precisely like such. Why does it take a minute? I got two pronunciation, one, Julian Mickwell and How to Pronounce Pronunciation book. Do we do both?
I don't like writing essays, but...
Well, then don't do them. Jesus.
So, Becky, I'm going to tell it to you.
You are looking at Julian's pronunciation guide, where we look at how to pronounce better some of the most mispronounced words in the world, like this other curious word, but how do you say what you're looking for
Croissant.
today? Very interesting English words that have a very curious and confusing spelling, I must admit. That's a literary genre, critical explanation or interpretation of a text, especially of scripture. If you're after more religious words,
exegesis,
from the Bible,
exegesis, exegesis,
exegesis,
exegesis,
Jesus.
Jesus.
Exegesis.
All right, there it is. Thank you, Julian Mickwell. Exegesis. Does this pronunciation book say the same thing?
Exegesis.
Awesome.
Exegesis.
Awesome. He says it right off the top. Thank you, Mr. Right off the top man. Exegesis. Exegesis. All right. So let's read this sentence again. A good example is offered by the laborious exegesis which has been performed in recent years on Grotius on the one hand and on the natural law theory of the Catholic Counter-Reformation on the other. Scholars have emphasized Grotius's ties with the medieval tradition and the influence of the Catholic Counter-Reformation on subsequent natural law theorists. This revision has blurred the image of Grotius as an innovator and a precursor, which has been established by his followers Puffendorf and Thomasius, and which since then has been mechanically and faithfully repeated and obstinately reproduced. But the problem of Hobbesian exegesis may not be at all a problem of historical criticism. Hobbes does not belong to the natural law tradition, and he does initiate the school of legal positivism. The Hobbesian paradox is genuine, if we could still use the term paradox, which historians have partially worn out. To understand this paradox, we must patiently enter into Hobbes's vast and apparently airtight system through detailed analysis. We must carefully observe its most delicate joints, test its buttresses, and uncover the reasons why it has taken the shape which it has. Buttresses. In my opinion, one of the fundamental problems which allow us to touch the most sensitive points of Hobbes's clever and systematic mechanism is the problem of the relationship between natural law and civil law. First, this problem is fundamental for any natural law theory. Second, as we shall see in Hobbes, it acquires so many facets that we may consider it as one of the most vexed questions in all of Hobbes's juridical and political work. We can briefly formulate the question of the relationship between natural law and civil law as follows. Hobbes has developed one of the most typical and rigorous conceptions of legal justice which has ever been held. By legal justice is meant that conception which maintains that justice consists in compliance with one's obligation, whatever the content of that obligation may be. If we consider a particular kind of obligation, those of the citizen toward the state, justice consists in obeying the law, whatever the content of the law may be. Hobbes presents this conception in well-known passages when he states that we can only be unjust toward the person with whom we have stipulated a compact or to whom we have made a promise. Justice thus means to comply with, and injustice not to comply with, the terms of a compact or a promise. It follows from this definition that we cannot speak of just or unjust actions in the state of nature where human beings are not bound by any compact, but once civil society has been instituted through the intersubjective covenant of union, a just action is one which conforms to the law, while an unjust action is one which does not conform to the law. The law in its turn derives from the will of the sovereign on the basis of the conditions established by the social contract. This is, as anyone can see, a clear formulation of the legalistic conception of justice, which is a feature of a conception which looks at justice from a merely formal point of view. The essential characteristic of a legalistic conception of justice is to consider the law as the only and insuperable criterion of just and unjust, for it is the command of the only person who has the legitimate power to command. What is commanded is just merely because it is commanded by the person who has the power to command. What is prohibited is unjust merely because it is prohibited. It is clear that the legalistic conception of justice provides the ideological framework for legal positivism. Legal positivism is the juridical conception which considers positive law, juridical, as a self-sufficient criterion of what is just and what is unjust. Such a conception eliminates any reference to natural law taken as the set of principles or norms of conduct which should allow us to approve or disapprove of positive law. And yet here lies the interpretive problem regarding Hobbes' theory. For his entire legal system rests on his acknowledgement that there exist laws of nature to which he devotes, as is well known, as specific and exhaustive analysis in his political books, the question thus arises: how can a system which begins by accepting laws of nature be a typical expression of a formal conception of justice? We face the same difficulty if we ask the question in another way. The aim and outcome of Hobbes's system is the theory of the absolute state, that is, of a state endowed with a power which is as free from constraints and limits as humanly possible. He's got the laws of nature written down here, and actually I want to speak on them. Chapter 14 and chapter 15 of Leviathan speaks of the laws of nature. Chapter 14 and chapter 15. And then in the elements, it's chapter 15, 16, and 17, and 18. And then De Civi, the citizen, it's chapters 2, 3, and 4. So that was like a really important, like, wow, that is referenced really. Where does Hobbes talk about the laws of nature? Well, De Civi, the citizen, elements, and Leviathan. And then go back and listen to the chapters I just said. One of the salient features of Hobbes's inquiry is his systemic hunting down of everything that can constitute a constraint or a limit to the power of the state. Hobbes engages in this hunt with skill, rigor, and rational passion. At its end, Hobbes has succeeded in giving us a conception of the state which has driven the process of monopolization of the law by the state to its extreme consequences. Hobbes has eliminated all sources of norms, especially the common law, other than the law, that is, the will of the sovereign, and all legal orders other than that of the state, in particular those of the church, of the international community, and of minor associations. However, we cannot say that the state has a complete monopoly of the law if we let the law of nature survive side by side with positive law, and side by side with the various forms which positive law may assume. In other words, we cannot say that the power of the state is absolute, that is, without constraints, if we recognize the existence and legitimacy of the laws of nature. For these are indeed, by their inner constitution, superior to positive laws, which must conform to natural laws. And yet Hobbes, as remarked above, placed his state on the traditional pedestal of natural law. Furthermore, whenever he had a chance, he set natural law side by side with positive law. He constantly refers to it and mentions it in countless passages. Besides analyzing it specifically in the chapter cited in note 3, a question analogous to the previous one thus arises: how can the power of the state be absolute if the will of the sovereign must measure itself against natural law? Why should Hobbes eliminate every source of norms other than the state if he then lets natural law survive, which is the most dangerous adversary of every positive law? We could finally present this fundamental antinomy of Hobbes's thought in the following terms. Hobbes's inquiry begins with natural law. Therefore, natural law theorists rightly consider him one of their own. But Hobbes ends with the solid construction of a positivistic conception of the state. Therefore, legal theorists rightly appropriate him. There is an apparent contrast between Hobbes's starting point and his point of arrival. Hobbes's theory is known above all for the strength of its construction and the rigor of its logic. Along what path does Hobbes develop this analysis so that he can move from a premise which is certain to a conclusion which is as certain but which contradicts the premise? This essay aims at analyzing all of the road which Hobbes has followed in answering this question, which we consider crucial to our historical understanding of Hobbes's legal philosophy. You get that? Huh? You understand? How much more time we got? I want to keep this under 30 minutes. Don't want to waste your whole lives, you know. I got 1 minute. Well, let's begin chapter 138. In De Civi, the citizen, in a footnote, he says, with respect to the question whether the sovereign may perform illegal acts first, though by right, that is, without injury to them, he may do it, yet can he not do it justly, that is, without breach of the natural laws and injury against God. In Leviathan, the sovereign never wanteth right to anything otherwise than as he himself is the subject of God and bound thereby to observe the laws of nature. And elsewhere, it is true that sovereigns are all subjects to the law of nature, because such laws be divine and cannot by any man or commonwealth be abrogated. But to those laws which the sovereign himself, that is, which the commonwealth maketh, he is not subject. Hobbes never devoted a specific analysis to this issue, but if we accurately study Hobbes' system, we realize that it is only an apparent problem. It's just an apparent problem.